There are many Palestinian groups resisting the Israeli occupation, but the two most dominant parties in the Palestinian political scene are Fatah and Hamas, who don't really get along very well. It's possibly one of the biggest problems Palestinians face besides Israel's abuses, the fact that two of their biggest resistance groups do not see eye to eye. And while both groups are working towards building a Palestinian state on the territories that Israel occupied in 1967, including East Jerusalem, Gaza and the West Bank, they happen to disagree on a few things. They have been particularly at odds since mid-2007 after Hamas became the de facto ruler of Gaza, defeating President Mahmoud Abbas's long-dominating Fatah party in the elections. Hamas then pushed Fatah out of Gaza after it refused to recognize the votes, becoming the leading Palestinian force against Israel's attacks. Fatah rules the West Bank and acts as the representative of the Palestinian people at the United Nations. The secular movement Fatah, which was established by Yasser Arafat and his friends in 1959 and initially premised on the armed struggle to liberate historic Palestine, is now more in favor of negotiating with Israel and is not about being an armed resistance anymore. Hamas, which calls itself a Palestinian Islamic National Liberation and Resistance Movement, still uses armed resistance tactics. In the 90s, the Fatah-led PLO officially renounced armed resistance and backed a UN Security Council resolution that calls for the building of a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders alongside an Israeli state. It then signed the 1993 Oslo Accords, giving Israel full control of the Palestinian economy as well as civil and security matters in more than 60% of the West Bank. Arafat and his successors were criticized for accepting the Oslo Accords, which many regarded as a collaboration with the Israeli occupation and a move that divided Palestinians. Hamas does not recognize Israel and believes its establishment is entirely illegal, but just a couple of years ago it accepted the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state on the 1967 borders. Fatah has long accepted the building of such a Palestinian state, but also recognizes Israel. And while Hamas is regarded as a terrorist organization by the US, the EU and the UK, and of course Israel, Fatah allegedly has its own skeletons. It is accused of being deeply corrupt and working for Israeli interests rather than the concerns of Palestinians. Many have criticized the diplomacy-based approach by the leader of Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, as obsolete. Instead of pushing for Israel to be held accountable and for boycotts, divestment, for Israel to be sanctioned, he, Abbas, embraced Israel and went down a path of negotiating with them. But regardless of their differences, young Palestinians especially think the whole system and its leadership needs an overhaul, as these groups often seem to be more interested in ruling rather than resisting the Israeli occupation, which serves as the biggest obstacle of all. The fact that we are 11 years later since the Hamas-Fatah split still talking about reconciliation shows that neither side is really interested in reconciling, and this is why it's so important for Palestinians to move past these two political parties and instead unite together.